Hello, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. Thanks for spending your Valentine's Day with me. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge. If you're just joining me for this drawing and painting series, and this is date night painting, Valentine's Day diptych painting acrylic on wood panels. I wrote the title down since I am, it's so hard to remember these class titles sometimes. They're such a mouthful. Uh, so yeah, we're going to be creating a diptych tonight, a diptych or a solo panel. So if you're by yourself, then you're just going to create one panel. And since I am by myself, and we only have an hour and a half, I will just be creating one panel here. But if you've got two people there, like I see a couple of partner groups there in the Zoom, then you'll be creating a diptych because you'll each be making one. So when you put them together, you've got a two-panel situation, which is called a diptych. And then, if you had three people there, you could have a triptych even. So that will be fun. And typically, this is the kind of class that maybe I might want it to be a two-part class. But since it's just for tonight for Valentine's Day, we're going to zip through it pretty quickly. I do have some resources that I can share with you if some of the methods that we're going to be using are new to you and you get a little lost. Then this recording will be available on YouTube tomorrow. So you can always just do what you can or do your best, or you can wait to finish it. There's no rule that says we have to finish this in the time that we have tonight. So don't rush, and you might still be working on it when we're done at the end of the hour, or maybe it'll be finished and you'll be ready to hang it on the wall. So I love the thing about these wood panels that I like is that they can hang directly on the wall. You might want to put a little wire on the back of them so that they'll, not fall off of the wall. But I've had mine hanging up here on just two little nails here above my desk for the last 2 months, and they haven't fallen down and they've been just fine. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over supplies and we'll get started here and switch to my tabletop view. All right, so don't forget to tag your work tonight, especially tonight. Hopefully y'all will want to post these on Instagram and share. Make sure to tag your work with those hashtags. Make it with Michael's and Michael's classes. And you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art, and definitely tag me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art after you make these tonight. And here's some of my business cards. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, where you can follow me there. Chanel can drop my link tree in the chat. I've got some fun things going on right now on Zoom, a draw club and a paint club on Saturdays that you can join me for if you're interested. And I provide reference images for those, and they're just drop-in classes where we cover a different subject matter each time, and the reference images are provided, like I said, and we just run through quickly like how I would approach drawing and painting that, and we draw and paint those subjects together, and it's a lot of fun. I've got some cool themes coming up over the next few Saturdays. Okay, so yeah, here I did 2 of them, so it took me a little longer to create both of these panels when I was prepping for the class, but I'm just going to be creating one tonight. And then I've got a couple of different themes here. We're going to be adding our own messages to these. So I've got a few suggestions that you might use. I'll share those when we get to that point, regarding, whether or not you're going to be giving these to, if you're doing it with your sweetheart, your partner, maybe you're doing a message more like, I love you, or the typical messages that you might see on the candy hearts. And then if you're single, then maybe you might want to use something like self-love or self-care. I've got a whole list that I will share with you in just a moment. And then that reminds me, I thought I had everything ready here, but I need to grab the reference images of the candy hearts real quick. Give me just one moment. Okay, so I'll go over the other supplies while I pull up my images here on the Google Drive. They were not the most amazing images of candy hearts because I planned this class 2 months ago and they weren't selling candy hearts in the stores 2 months ago. Oh my goodness. Uh, one moment here. Let me pull up my Google Drive with those images that I shared with you. Thought I had everything ready. Okay, I will search for them in just a second. Okay, so we're using the Golden brand paints here. You can use any acrylic paints that you have on hand. They don't have to be these, but I'm using this same little set that I've been using recently for some other acrylic based classes, like the one last week that will be continuing in another week from now on underpaintings, or 2 ways to get started with an acrylic painting. I've got a variety of paintbrushes here, and you don't have to have the exact same paintbrushes as me. My kind of go-to paintbrushes is to have one nice round brush, one nice flat brush, and then one thinner brush like this. Although actually one like this would be better, a liner brush, but something that's got a nice little fine point on it that we can get these details. And then I also put the Posca marker, the red Posca marker, on the supply list as well. And that is because you may have trouble with the text doing it with the paintbrush. And I certainly had some issues myself because I try not to get too fancy when I'm planning these classes so that I don't do anything that might be, too complicated and for beginners. And so I realized I was putting a little too much finesse into the text. So a Posca marker is a great way to get the job done on that text, and it looks nice and graphic. And so that's what I ended up using for these two, especially. This one I started to paint it. Anyway, so that's why the Posca marker is there. But if you want to attempt to use more of like a fine liner brush and paint on the text, if you don't have a Posca marker, you can do that as well. Okay, and then we've got these wood panels. They come in a set of 5 at Michael's, the Artist Loft brand wood panels. So I've even got a couple of extras over here. I've got some palettes, candy, and then water cups. I like to have 2 water cups, one for my light and one for my dark colors, a paper towel or 2. I've got some shop towels here. And then we're going to do a little bit of sketching real quick to get us started. So I've got a Canson sketchbook and some pencils. And I believe that is it on supplies, except for those reference images. So let me just pause for a moment and pull those up. Actually, Chanel, would you remind me what the keywords I used were on the title of that handout?
Yes.
I searched Diptych and it didn't come up.
Its title is Date Night Painting, Valentine's, without the apostrophe. I don't know. It's the same title of the class, so I don't know if it's the same as what you saved it as.
Yeah, they must have given it a different title than. Oh, here we go. I called it Candy Heart References. Kept it simple. Okay. All right. So I put these on top of construction paper when I photographed them. And like I said, I was not blown away with the way the text looked on these. So we're going to ignore the text on here, but the one part of the takeaway of the text, I think this one with 1,000 years on it is a good one to look at when it comes time to add the text. Because most times the candy hearts, it's not perfect, right? There's going to be a few little gaps. So that's the idea that I put in there. I basically just used some capital letters, block letters. Maybe you could look at a typewriter font if you wanted to. get a little more specific to how the candy heart text tends to look, but I think any font will be fine for this text, and we'll just leave it a little kind of broken, some gaps in between the letters, but we're going to create our own messages. But mostly I just wanted us to have these reference images so that we could draw the candy hearts and paint them in a way that makes them feel three-dimensional and full, and also to get this shadow on here. So that's the main reason I wanted to have these reference images. Okay, so let's get started sketching them. I'm going to move my paintings aside. And we're not going to worry about color just yet. Let's just grab our pencils and quickly flesh out a little sketch. I teach a lot of in-person classes, and sometimes I have folks roll in to the class that weren't there the week before, and they try to jump in where we are in a project, and they'll just start going for it on the canvas or on their final watercolor paper, in a watercolor class. And I'm always like, whoa, where's the fire? Let's do a sketch first. I'm not ever going to go straight to painting something before doing a little sketch. I'm lying. I do sometimes, but it usually doesn't turn out as well as if I did a little sketch first. So let's do that. And also, when we do this, we can play around with the text. We can see if our text is going to fit. So, because we're making up our own messages here. Okay, so first thing, if you're doing a diptych with your partner, both of you are going to want a piece of sketch paper. You might both draw them side by side like this in your on your sketchbook paper, so that you can get an idea of how they're going to look next to each other. Like maybe if you wanted to do like a mirror image, you might, do one where the hearts are, a little higher and a little lower. And then on this side, you've got the lower one on the left and the higher one on the right. Something like this, so that it's the mirror image, right? In both of the diptychs. So just think about how they're going to look together as a diptych. And then if you're painting them one panel for just one, then you don't have to worry about how they're going to look as a diptych side by side. The main idea I want to talk about is just making this heart look three-dimensional. So let me just quickly sketch some contours of a three-dimensional heart here. Let's look at one of our reference photos. This one with 1,000 years is just probably the most clear out of all of these, but the other ones I wanted us to look at them, for seeing how the shadows would fall if you had two side by side right there. Okay, so it's not a perfectly triangular dip down in the center of the heart. And it's not a perfect little triangle point at the end. They're a little more rounded. So we're just softening the shape there. So we're looking for more of a rounded shape to the heart. Just to start that run.
Hey, Adrian. Which pencil do you recommend they use?
I recommend you use a super light pencil that's easy to erase in case you make mistakes. I'm using a darker pencil so that my lines will show up online on the Zoom, because the Zoom doesn't like really light pencils, but a light pencil where you're not putting a lot of pressure on it so you can easily erase. Okay, and then from that rounded heart shape, I want you to think about contour lines here. So if you don't know what contour lines are, Chanel has a previous class that she can drop in the chat to share with you. And you can go back and watch that, but I'm going to quickly just illustrate the contour lines of this three-dimensional heart. But first, let me get the perspective that we're seeing here. So we're seeing the bottom of it. We're seeing kind of the side of this three-dimensional thing. So it might be like that. It might be more just one side of it. So we're just looking at the picture and seeing how much of this extra shape can we see. Okay, and then from there, I just want to talk about the contours real quick. So on the horizontal axis, there's just a little bit of a roundedness to it. So it kind of curves down slightly at the edge. And this is important when we're painting it, because when we're painting it, we want it to feel three-dimensional and not flat. So we're going to try to make our brush strokes follow this three-dimensional form. So on the horizontal axis, I'm seeing that. And like I said, if you're like, what the heck is she talking about with these contour lines? That class on contour lines that we just dropped in the chat can help you there. And then on the vertical axis, I'm seeing something like this. It's kind of curving out to the right on the right side. It's a little more straight in the center, and then it's curving out to the left on this side. And you're probably noticing as I do that, oh yikes, my light got in the way. It's making it feel more three-dimensional, right? Even though the surface of it appears fairly flat, there is a roundedness to the top of the candy heart, and having that roundedness in the way that we paint it is going to make it feel more three-dimensional. So we're not just going to paint it super flat. We're going to make our brush strokes curve around with the brush strokes that we add to it. And I don't have a ton of time to teach all about that. So like I said, I'm going to zip through it, but then we're going to share some resources so that you can catch up and be up to speed with these concepts of three-dimensional rendering and contour lines. Okay, and then on this part of the candy heart, the side of it down here, we're just going to put these straight vertical lines all the way down. And you don't have to put these in your painting. This is just a way for you to see the three dimensions. We're going to make our brush strokes follow these contour lines. And then on the horizontal axis, it's curving the same direction as the rest of the heart. So you see how that really makes it feel three-dimensional. So this is just a concept. It's just an idea. It's just a sketch to get your mind thinking in 3 dimensions so that whenever we add our brush strokes, they can feel a little more 3D. But you know, if yours ends up feeling a little more flat and not 3-dimensional, that's okay. I've got a couple of tips when we start painting that can help us make it look 3-dimensional by the way that we add the color. So even if this doesn't make sense to you, I think you'll still have a product that you're happy with, but this is just a little extra help to get us to be thinking in 3 dimensions. And then the shadow that's falling off, we're just looking at the shape of the shadow. So it kind of comes out like that. And then we will do straight lines. So our brush strokes will be nice and straight across the shadow because that's telling us we're looking at a flat surface. Okay, so that is basically it. But although sometimes I do like to go back and do cross-hatching lines, or maybe even take the side of your pencil and shade in the whole thing, and then that's really going to make it feel like a convincing shadow. All right, and then let's sketch it one more time over here. Or maybe I'll just take my eraser actually and erase those contour lines so that I can see if my message is going to fit on here. So I'm just going to erase out some of those contour lines and then practice to see if my message will fit. Because if you're going to use a message that's got a lot of letters, you want to make sure that you're planning out, like just for example, I'm trying to remember what I had done on here. I had tried to use a different phrase. I can barely see it. I ended up painting over it because it didn't fit. I like had written it out and then I got over here and I was like having to squeeze in a bunch of the letters off to the right. And I was like, well, this is not going to work. So I had to paint over it and try again. And I was like, how about self-care? Maybe it was, oh, it was love yourself. That's what it was. Okay, so here are the messages that I found that we could use for singles. So I've got self-care, binge watch, alone time, bubble bath, it will be okay. I love that one. Love yourself. And like I said, that one I had a hard time squeezing it in, but maybe if you did you are instead of your, that would shorten it a little bit. Take a breath. I'm going to try to use this one. I'm going to see if that one will fit. Happy thoughts. You are enough. And again, you could use the letter U and the letter R instead of you are, and that would make a little more room. And then here's some messages you might use for couples. Hug me, so fine, kiss me, sweet pea, darling, be mine, honey, cutie, cutie pie, my boo, too cute, it's love, you rock. There are just some suggestions. Y'all can definitely come up with your own or use one of those. I'm happy to repeat some of them, but I just want to demonstrate how I might have issues. Like I want to try take a breath. That's the one I want to try. Okay, so thinking about my big blocky letters. And I just am going to go for it and just see if I can squeeze in, take a breath without it looking wonky or not having enough space. So just take your message and just start writing it in big blocky letters and see if it will fit. And I think it's fine if your text is a little flat across it. We're not going to worry too much about making the text feel, oh, see, I'm like, ooh, with breaths, I can't go too big. Like my B is kind of big. I might need to, this is a good example of what might be happening for you. So I made my B nice and fat, and that is already taking up quite a bit of space. So I'm going to try it again. And this time I'm going to make my B a little skinnier and scooch it over to the left. And this has maybe happened to you when you're signing a birthday card for somebody, right? You're like, I'm going to draw happy birthday, Alexandria across the birthday card. And you get happy birthday and they're okay. You're like, Alex, looking good. And then, uh-oh, I've got to squeeze the rest of Alexandria into like 1 inch on the side of the card, right? So this has happened to all of us, I'm sure. It just takes a little bit of problem solving here to make sure that we can squeeze our text into our design. Okay, I did it. That looks pretty good. So just take a moment to make sure that your message that you're choosing is going to fit on a heart and you understand like how much spacing you'll have to have in between the letters so that you don't run into the issue that I had here with love yourself. It was like, love, looking good. Y, O, U, R. And then I was like having to squeeze the word self way over here in the corner. So I had to paint over it and start over. But that's a good example of how it's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. You can paint over it with white. Our titanium white is the most opaque paint that you'll have in a set of paints. And it should be able to cover it up so that you can start over if something like that does happen. All right, any questions about the messages or the plan for our candy heart paintings here before we start painting?
No questions so far.
Okay, great. All right. So all I'm going to do is just take a breath on one panel. You maybe are doing 2 hearts, in which case you're going to have 2 shadows, and you know you're definitely going to have to use a little bit of creative problem solving here with your partner to figure out how you're going to design your diptych, how that's going to look. But this was my original plan. I'm basically just going over it with a darker pencil so that you can see my original plan for this one, my diptych that I did. So another thing you might take into account is if you're doing two of them, make sure you sketch them both side by side and see if the shadows make sense. Although it might be kind of fun if one was like going off the edge and then you could see the other edge of it on the other canvas. I'd love to see somebody do that. That'd be really cute to have it continue. That'd be one creative way of solving that problem. If like part of your second heart was like cut off on this side, then put it half of it over here, right? Let me just draw it like what I'm envisioning. Let's say we've got a third heart on here and you're like, oh no, it went out of the frame. Then maybe over here we do something like that. So it feels like it continues over there. That might be fun. Okay, let's get started with our painting. So set my sketch aside and get my wood panel out. Okay, so here's the part of the class where we're going to talk about color. And I don't have time to talk all about color theory, but we did have a class on that back in November where we did something like this. We did a sheet where we mixed up using this golden set that I'm using tonight, all of the primary colors that come in it. We mixed our secondary colors, then we mixed all of our browns from that, and then we added more. We talked about complementary colors, and then we added white to them, and then we made black using a mixture of our complementary colors plus blue to make them look more black. Then we added water to them and watered them down. We made a value scale. And then lastly, we mixed up some pastels. So the part of that class where we talked about pastels is the part that you might check out if you struggle with the color mixing, because I don't have time to go in depth on color mixing too much here, but the basics are you're going to take whatever color that you want to use and you're going to add just a touch of that color to white in order to make a pastel. So if you want it to be a pastel gray, you're going to take gray and add it to white. You always want to start with the lighter color first, which is the white, and then slowly add the other color. And I've got all those different backgrounds in the reference photos there because I've put those candy hearts behind some different color construction paper to have some different suggestions for background colors for you. And, you know, just think about colors that you think look nice together. If you want the candy heart to be white, then the white candy heart is going to reflect a little bit of gray and maybe a little bit of blue. So we'll want to make like a pastel gray or blue to add to the white candy heart. You might also add a little bit of any other color that you want the white candy heart to reflect. But in my reference photo, yikes, I keep forgetting about my screensaver on this iPad. I'm just going by the reference photo. It feels a little gray, so that's why I added gray. And then we've got the orange candy heart and another white one there. That white one's not really reflecting too much gray. But, oh wait, it definitely is. Actually, well, we'll talk about this shadow in just a minute, but the side of the candy heart is typically going to be reflecting maybe the color of the candy heart next to it or the color of the paper. So what I did here was I just really looked at I think I looked at this one maybe, and I was thinking about how, or no, wait, where's my pink? Oh yeah, in the pink one, that's what I was doing. I was looking at the pink one and noticing that in the shadow, it feels purple. So that's why I used purple in the shadow. So these reference photos are really here to help you problem solve what color would be in the shadow of your candy heart and what would make the most sense. So I think what makes the most sense is to just look at the photograph, decide which color you want to use, and work off of that versus working off your imagination of what the light may be doing to a certain color might be more confusing. So like on this one with the purple background, the shadows on that one are really dark purple, almost black. So that's what I used here. There's a little bit of purple in these black shadows. They're not just black. And so that's all I did for my diptych, right? I did pink and I did purple. So I made my shadow purple on the pink paper background, or the pink background. It's have to be considered construction paper, and then black or purple on the purple paper. But let's say you want to use the yellow background, then maybe you might use kind of a greenish color in the shadow. So I'm seeing kind of a greenish color in the shadow, and that would make sense with yellow that it might be creating sort of a dark green shadow there, or maybe you just go with gray or black. And yeah, on the pink, a purple shadow makes sense. On the purple one, a black shadow makes sense. Let's say you wanted to do blue. I think a blue black shadow would make sense. Any questions about the shadows or the colors that like choosing your colors? Questions about that?
Excuse me, sorry. We don't have any questions about the colors, but we did have a question about shadows in particular.
Okay.
Susanna asks, for the shadow, we do more of a linear line down, correct? Mine was a bit off. This is from when you were doing your sketching.
Okay. Yeah, just a straight line. I mean, I did diagonal straight lines, but it could just be straight lines all the way down. Just something that tells you that the surface is flat as opposed to the surface on the candy hearts. We want it to feel a little more rounded. And this is really just a guide to help you when you're painting it so that it feels more three-dimensional in the painting. So understanding it in a drawing is really helpful. But then, you know, your brush strokes might even like curve around because the shadow does curve, but then overall, we're just making it feel nice and flat. Okay, thank you. I see Susanna saying, okay, got it. Great. Okay, so as far as choosing your colors, just pick two colors that you like. A color for the candy heart and a color for the background. And if you're putting two candy hearts on one of your panels, then you're choosing two different colors for your candy hearts. And like I said, I'm just going to paint one. So we're going to have a lot of different paintings here, and you're going to have to do some problem solving on your own. Most of my Michael's classes, I tend to take a lot of the think work out of it for us, and we paint along with me and don't make a lot of choices on our own. But I trust y'all to make some good choices and different choices with your partner or by yourself. Okay, I'm going to keep it really simple for myself though here, and I'm going to do my take a breath design, but I think I'm going to do, let's see, I'll do the white. I'm going to do this again, the same sort of thing. I'm going to do pink background and white with the purple shadow. I'm going to have it say, take a breath. Okay. So this is where I want to mention last week's class, which will be continuing on next week. So we're in the middle of this idea. I'll find my in progress one from last week. And we're about to use one of these methods again. So last week's class was two different ways of starting a painting. And one of the ways was to sketch with your paint, to sketch an underpainting with your paintbrush and then fill in everything with washes. And the other way was to start with a tone and then build on the tone with darks and lights. And that's as far as we got in last week's class. We'll be finishing that next week and ending up with something that looks like this. But tonight we're going to use that same way of getting started, and we're going to sketch our candy heart like this, and we're going to start to fill in with our washes of our colors that we've chosen. And then we're going to build on that to continue painting our candy hearts. So first thing we're going to do is prep our palette with our colors. And I see Chanel just dropped that class title in the chat, Acrylic Painting Basics, 2 ways to start a painting. So if you're watching this on YouTube, that's what you want to search from last week if you struggle with this right now and you need some extra help. But hopefully I'm going to explain it well enough right now that we'll all be just fine. Okay, so I'm going to use pink and what did I say? Pink and white and purple. Although now I'm overthinking that because I'm like, what if I want to hang it on the wall? Maybe I want different colors for a little triptych here. It's fine. It's totally fine. I like pink and purple, so I'm going to do more of it. Okay, so first we want to make a pink. So I'm going to squeeze out a whole bunch of white. I'm cheating and using some backup white that I have here because I am running low on that golden white. We need a lot of white for all these pastels. Normally, I would discourage you from using too much paint because it might get wasted, but. And then I need some red to make my pink, and I might use that red again later. If you squeeze out too much red, you might use it to paint your message on there. Or actually, I'm definitely going to use that red because I'm going to use it to make that purple shadow with my blue. So I need my blue and my red to make my purple shadow, and I need my red and my white to make my pink. And then I need that blue also to make that really pale blue or gray. It really was just a pastel blue. I'm looking at it more closely. I did not make a gray. I just used pastel blue instead of gray for the reflective light on there. And then on the side of the message here, remember you're using maybe the same color as your shadow or maybe another color that you're seeing reflected on the candy heart. So for example, with this one, I used sort of a peachy orange, a little bit darker than the yellow on the side of the yellow one. But then I felt like the orange sweet candy heart might be reflecting a little bit over here. So I added a little bit more orange to the side. Oh, thank you so much, Sue. That's wonderful feedback there. I was like, I want to read that one. I saw that pop up in the chat. Sue said, your teaching style is so amazing, thorough information, but yet not intimidating, provides encouragement so you feel you can do it. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. I try my best to think about all the issues you may run into and help you before you run into them. Okay, so yeah, just ask me if you're struggling with what color you might need on the side if as we get deeper into it, if you feel like your candy heart is not looking as three-dimensional as you want it to, it may just be a matter of adding a different color to the side of it so that it feels a little more rounded right there. So I want to sit here and tell you all the possible solutions to those colors, but I'm going to move on. Okay, so I've got colors to make everything I need. I can do a purple with this, I can do my pastel blue, and I can do my pink. So that's the 3 colors that I need. And then as you're mixing up your colors, just ask me if you're struggling to mix up the colors. So we want to make quite a bit of whatever color you're using on your background. I'm going to use pink. So I'm mixing up quite a large pile of pink here, but we are going to water it down to make a wash of this pink for the background to start, but we'll still go ahead and make a nice big pile. And sometimes when you add the color to white, you add a little more than you mean to, and so it may end up like a darker shade of pink than you want it to be. So I like to, instead of just adding more white to it, take a new pile of white over here somewhere else, and then add some of that darker pink to it to lighten it up. And some things that in my in-person classes can make people struggle when they're color mixing is using too big of a brush when they're mixing. And so it takes a lot of just swishing the paintbrush around in the color to get it to mix. I like to use, even though I'm going to use a bigger brush to paint it on in a bit, I like to use a small brush to mix it. And you can use a palette knife too. I just prefer to use a paintbrush because sometimes the palette knife it can be a little harder to really like mix it up together on a small palette like this with a palette knife. Okay, so I made a pretty good pile of pink, I think, for my wash here. And then I do want just some white by itself, even though it feels like white could just be left alone. We're painting on this wood panel here, so we need the white. We don't have a white canvas unless you are painting on a white canvas, but even still, go ahead and make a little pile of white, and then we'll add some water to all of these colors. So I'm just taking my paintbrush and just literally dripping my water into those. Sometimes I even use an eyedropper to make my washes a little faster, but I didn't grab my eyedropper. So I'm really just making a little puddle. I might even pour some water into my palette here to make it happen a little faster. And then add some pink to that so that I get a nice little puddly wash of pink. And the reason to start with these really thinned out washes is, for one, I didn't start out with a really thin wash on this one, and it took forever to coat this in one layer because it was so thick. And when you start out thick, then you kind of have to stay that thick. And so then I just kept having to mix up more purple. Whereas if we start out with a thin wash of whatever color you're using on the background, then we can just cover it really quickly, get some paint on every part of the canvas, and then we can add another layer, and our next layer can be a little thicker and it'll go on a lot easier. Just makes everything easier, and it helps you to control your layers. There's so many benefits to starting out thin with washes. Boy, that pink, it looks nice and pink to me, but on the screen it just shows up so pale. I might go ahead and make it a little darker. Okay, and then I need purple.
Adrienne, are you adding color, or are you adding water to every color or just the white?
I'm adding color to everything right now so that we can start out with washes.
And then what size brush are you using right now?
I am just using a small, it's a size 4 brush just to mix. And yeah, this is what we're going for in just a moment here. We're going to have these thin washes that we're going to cover the panel with. So that's why I'm adding water to everything. Okay, so to make my purple, I'm starting with my red. So you always want to start with the lighter color first and then slowly introduce the darker color because the darker color will just eat the lighter color. So my blue is darker. It's the more dominant of the two. Sometimes with certain colors like this, people are like, how do you know which one is darker? And it's like, well, just think about which one is more dominant. And the blue is definitely going to overtake that red faster than the red would overtake the blue. So I don't need as much blue as I do red to make a purple. And then I'm just dropping some water on top of that to make it a nice thin wash of purple for my shadow and for the side of my heart. And I might need to make more of this in a bit, but that is okay. All right. And then actually we're going to use yellow. So we're going to make yellow is going to be the color that we're going to use to sketch our underpainting with. Talked about this briefly last week with our monochrome painting. I was saying if you do this again with a more of a colorful image, to start with yellow as the color that you do this little sketch with. So I'm just taking some water and making a little puddle again, spilling it on my desk. And then I'm going to add some yellow to it because I want it to be nice and thin and watery. So this is for everyone. We're going to draw with our yellow paint. And for everyone who's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make a mistake and it's going to be hard to erase it because it's paint and paint is permanent. I'm going to show you real quick how paint is not permanent. Okay, so you got to watch me quickly because I'm going to do this fast. I'm going to take my yellow and I'm going to make just a mark here and then I'm going to erase it with my larger paintbrush and some water. So let's say you're drawing your heart and you're like, whoa, that's not how I want it to look. If you really quickly grab some water and your paintbrush and you scrub it really quickly, oh my God, it's not coming off. It'll come off enough that you can paint over it. Plus, we're using yellow, which yellow is the easiest color to cover up. So that's why I want us to use yellow instead of another color. I'm like, that did not work out exactly how I wanted it to. It mostly went away. Those of you who were in the class last week saw me do that with the red on the canvas paper and it worked a lot easier. I forgot about how this wood panel would absorb that. But we'll be able to erase it enough that you can, paint it again and it'll be fine. But the idea is that we want our sketch to be visible to us, but easy to paint over. So I'm just taking my liner brush now, that long skinny brush, one that's easy to draw with. And I'm getting my yellow nice and liquidy. And then I'm just gonna draw my big candy heart shape on here. Nice and rounded. And yeah, just do your best. It might be a little wonky and that is okay. You do not need perfection. Nobody's giving you a grade. The only expectations you have to meet are the expectations that you put on yourself. And even though we are making something that I talked about, it would look nice in a frame, or you don't even need a frame, that it would be nice hanging on the wall. You don't have to hang it up. You don't have to show it to anybody. Those are just things I like to say to myself to take the pressure off. Nobody has to know this ever happened. Just kidding. It's going to be great. But, those are things to tell yourself to take the pressure off. I got my nice big rounded shape, and then since it's just yellow and it's so easy to cover up, I can fix any wonkiness by just adding onto it. Like I went a little small on this side. I'm just balancing out the shape a little bit that way. And then we've got to get that 3-dimensional line for the side of it on there. Wow, I made my candy heart much bigger on this one than on the last one. I hope my shadow's going to fit. After all that planning and sketching in my sketchbook, I still went too big here. Okay, and then we want the shape of the shadow. Mine's going to be nice and dramatic this time since it's so big. Oh, I am not 100% happy with that. I kind of want to scooch it up. You know what? I am going to go ahead and scooch it up just a little bit. Let's see. Be a good demonstrator of how, even though it's not completely coming off, you can still erase it enough that if I do it again a little higher, I'll know to ignore these lines. I'm going to go a little smaller and a little higher. And maybe I will even use my thinned out purple so that it shows up not confusing. So everything that we do in the underpainting is going to be covered up. And so it really doesn't matter. This is a great example of how to power through some unintentional marks happening. I don't like the word mistakes. I like to say unintentional marks that we can easily make more intentional. So if something wacky like this happened to you, it's all nice and wet now, but I'm just doing it again, making it a little more balanced. Sometimes when I do things like that in a class demo, I think it's actually more helpful than if I had just done it exactly the way I wanted to, because it makes y'all feel better about having to fix it or do it again. You know, don't get attached. Non-attachment. Okay, now let's fill it in with these washes. So whatever brush makes sense to you. I'm going to use this rounded brush for the inside of my heart real quick. So I'm going to use my little puddle of white, and I'm just filling in this nice thin layer. But even on my initial layer here, I want to think about that roundedness. So I'm kind of curving out. Yeah, we're doing on time. Yeah, 35 minutes. I think that's good. My only concern is this going to be dry enough for me to use my Posca marker on it at the end of the class? I might have to pull out one of my blank panels and maybe demo the Posca marker on there. Now I'm kind of wishing I had prepped one of these that was blank and dry. I do have a hair dryer across the room if I need it. Okay, so there's my white in the center of the heart. And then I'm not going to do the shadow yet because I don't want things to bleed any more than they're already bleeding. I'm going to go ahead and start filling in this background with pink because I'm doing a pink background. Let me use my biggest brush. So your biggest brush will fill in the background a little faster. And take it from me, you want thin paint for this because, like I said, I did that purple background with thick paint and it took so much longer. And you're kind of just with this wood panel, it's almost like you're staining it. Like I kind of like how the wood panel looks peeking through there. I don't know if you can see that on the Zoom screen, but definitely in the photograph of the class example, you could see it. And then since I went so thick on the purple one, it's kind of harder to see that wood grain. And I like the way the wood grain looks peeking through. So that's another reason going nice and thin is fun for this. And you can always put another layer on if it's too thin for your taste. But going nice and thin will allow you to get a coat on very quickly and easily. You won't have to do what I did, which was sit there and mix up more purple multiple times by going too thick. And I certainly probably did that because I was, trying to save time, but then it ended up taking me longer. I was trying to cut corners by going thick with my first background layer. And then it ended up taking me longer because it was so uneven and I had to mix up so much extra paint to do it. Whereas if I had just done a thin layer of purple, I could have waited for that to dry and then maybe I would have liked it just as a thin stain of purple. And I wouldn't have even needed a second coat. But then if I did, a second coat would go on so much smoother if I had had a first coat. And the other thing you could do is you could prime this wood panel. Like if you don't like the way it's bleeding into the wood grain a little bit here as we're just kind of staining it, you might be noticing those little vertical lines that appear as it kind of bleeds. That's not going to happen when we get, our second and third layers on here. And the thicker we go, that's less likely to happen. But if you don't like that, you can prime this with gesso. Which is what comes on pretty much when you buy a canvas and it's already primed, it's already got that on there. But if you have unprimed canvas, you just get a tub of gesso and you prime it. Just like priming a wall before you paint it a color. But we're kind of using this thin wash as our primer. And yeah, I like the way the wood grain looks peeking through. And it should cover up the yellow. If the yellow is still peeking through, if you had, some mistake lines like I did, or some unintentional marks that you're trying to cover up, then maybe just mix in a little bit more white with your pink because your white is your most opaque color. Or maybe just a second coat of the pink that's a little thicker will also do the trick to cover up anything you want covered up underneath. Or if it's still not going away, maybe you do the background a darker color like purple and that or blue. That would definitely cover it up. Even a pastel purple or blue would surely cover up that yellow if you had some lines that you didn't want to be visible anymore. Okay, that's pretty good. And maybe that might be it for my background. But if you need a second coat on your background, then you go right ahead. I'm going to use just a little bit darker pink in some places to try to cover up that yellow a little more. Although the issue is now that I just want a little darker, now I want to spread that dark pink all around. Okay, that's good. All right, now I want to get this purple shadow. I'm also doing purple on the little inner ledge there, the side of the heart. And then the way that I'm going to separate that is I'm going to add a little highlight to it when I'm done. And then I'm also going to go just a shade darker with my purple with the next layers so that it separates it. That's what I did there. But for now, they maybe will kind of bleed together depending on what your background color is. Remember, you might be using a different color for the side. Like with this example, I used orange on the side of the yellow candy heart. I used a darker orange here. So really just one shade darker. But since my candy heart is the white one, it makes sense that it would be kind of picking up the reflection of well, I don't know. I'm like, what would it be picking up the reflection of? I guess it just looked dark, purple or blue in the photograph. So that's what I was basing it on, was how it looked in the photograph. Okay, so yeah, I lost my little line there, but I can easily put that back in. Maybe let me go ahead and put it back in now with some white just to separate it so I don't get confused. All right. So now we are ready to put a darker layer or a thicker layer. I mean, not darker, a thicker layer of these pastel colors. So on my candy heart itself, I'm doing white, but then I want a really pastel blue to accentuate it. So let me take some of my white to another palette over here and add just a touch of blue to it to get it to be a really pale pastel blue, and I'll use that in just a moment to accentuate. Yeah, the more I think about it, this should dry in time for me to do that Posca. Acrylic paint dries really quickly. All I really need is like 5 or 10 minutes once I've painted the center of the candy heart for it to dry, and then I should be able to draw on it. And if I can't, I will use my paintbrush to put the text on with the paintbrush before we're done here. Okay, so I've got just my thick white here, and I'm going to use my big rounded brush. And I'm going to really load it up with my white paint. And we are going to add a little bit of texture, because one thing I noticed as I was looking really closely at the candy hearts, and you can see, I don't know if it's showing up on the Zoom. Yeah, I can see it. I'm going to go in with my small brush and just add a little bit of like that grain, that kind of gritty grain that the candy hearts have, that chalkiness that they have to them. So, maybe you could add some darker shadows to them, some things like that. But I'm just going to add it by using a little bit of texture. So on these, I did it with the yellow and the white. These, I did it with the darker orange and the lighter orange. And balancing so many things on my legs here. Like both of those panels on my legs. Okay, but for now, remember this is where our brush strokes, like I could just fill this in all nice and flat, but rounding it and making it kind of follow those ideas of those contours will maybe make it feel a little bit more three-dimensional. So that was the only purpose of drawing those contour lines, was to just get you thinking in terms of 3 dimensions here. So really I'm just following the curve of the heart shape. And then globbing it on pretty thick. And I'm trying to keep my lines pretty clean there towards the edge. I also want to go wide enough that I cover up my little underpainting here. So I might have to go a little farther out to do that. Or maybe I might have to go back and add onto the background, but actually adding onto the background will be more work than just going a little wider. So if you're having that same issue where it bled like mine did, then just make it go out a little farther and try to cover that up. And then remember, we want this rounded shape here. So I'm not doing that perfect little heart point, that triangle point. I want it to be nice and rounded. I'm having to make mine a tiny bit bigger all the way around since I had to go a little wider up there at the top. I think what's showing through now up there doesn't bother me. Maybe it's just, more of a shadow being cast up there somehow. I'm gonna leave that alone. All right, so I'm trying to get it to be nice and curved all the way. Like maybe you even go back and think about that horizontal curve that we talked about, and you do a layer of white that kind of follows that curve. And now it's really feeling nice and rounded to me. It doesn't feel flat because my brush strokes have followed that curve all the way around. Okay, and then now I want to add a little bit of that texture on top and that blue on top to give it even more 3 dimensions. I'm going to use that same rounded brush. I'm definitely not using the thin washes anymore. I'm using thick paint here. And that pastel blue, let me make a tiny bit more pastel blue here. But you know, if yours is an orange candy heart, maybe you're making a slightly darker orange for this texture. Or if it's a purple candy heart, you're using slightly darker purple. Or if it's the yellow candy heart, you're using maybe a peachy orange with a lot of yellow in it. It's just, you know, slightly darker version. And I'm going to pull out my reference photo again for this part and just look at the candy heart itself and see like where do I see that gray on top. So it's sort of on the side here for sure. Really all along the bottom and the sides. And even though the side of the candy heart does appear white, like I see that little white edge, it feels more, well, I was looking at the pink paper and how, yeah, on this one, that's what I was looking at, is how it feels. I simplified it for sure, but I added purple along the bottom and then I added white to accentuate that side. So we'll do that in just a minute, but I want to get this top layer to be dry so that we can do the Posca marker on top pretty soon. So that's why I'm trying to zip it along here. All right, so I've got some gray on top, and then I don't want it to be too perfect. I want that kind of rough, chalky texture to come across. So with that, or sorry, I keep saying gray, but I mean pastel blue. So I might put a few little pock marks with that and spread those around in some places. Not too many. It's easy to do something like that and be like, oh yeah, that looks great. And then you like do it too much and it's overkill. All right, that's pretty good. And then I'll add a little bit more texture with my whites on top of that. And in a perfect world, I would let this dry first, honestly, so that it really felt chalky on top. But for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and do it now. And again, I'm just looking at one of these reference pictures and seeing where do I see some of that texture. And it's not really showing up the way I want it to when the rest of this is still wet. I really want it to like create that chalky feeling. I'm going to do it on top of this one a little bit here so you can see the difference, like on this dry surface. I don't know, it just makes it feel kind of rough. But that's kind of an extra thing. It's not a need, it's more of a want. I think this will look fine without that extra little texture. It just adds a little something to it, those imperfections, because a candy heart is not perfect. So we want to make it look a little beat up and not perfect. Another way you could make it look a little beat up and not perfect is to go around the edges here and maybe make some of your edges a little wonky. You might be like, no problem, my edges already look wonky. You know, make it kind of have some dents in some places. Something like that. That could be another way to make it look a little imperfect so it feels more like the candy heart. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that area alone because I want that to dry. So now let's work on the shadow. Interesting how my purple wash keeps separating. My red and my blue keep separating from each other. Okay, so I want this to be thicker purple now. But it doesn't have to be as thick as the candy heart. We just want it to feel like a shadow. I think the texture on the surface of the top of the candy heart is more important to make that nice and thick. And yeah, our sides of our candy hearts and our shadows are gonna be different depending on what colors we used. Ooh, this is still a little too wet for my taste. I'm afraid it's gonna bleed up into my These are kind of the kinds of things that don't happen when I'm planning for a class because I just have more time to let things dry. So I don't run into these same issues. I think if I just go thicker with my paint, that shouldn't be bleeding. That base layer is just still a little wet. Worst case scenario, I'll just fill y'all in on what you need to do, and then we just wait. You wait for your layers to dry. Definitely don't force it. If you're encountering these issues, I'm only powering through because I want to give y'all a good demo, but I can always, go back to this one and just talk about how I got there. Okay, this is way darker than I want it to be, but luckily paint is not permanent. I want to make a little bit more of a pastel purple here. I don't want it to be too pale, but I definitely want a pastel. And what I was doing going that dark is, yeah, the shadow doesn't need to be dark purple. It needs to be pastel purple on this pink background. But I do want it to be a shade darker on the side than in the shadow. So I'm gonna go with that for the side and that for the shadow. But hopefully y'all are doing some different colors and you're not having any issues troubleshooting your color mixing. I'm just painting the side of my candy heart in a slightly darker shade of whatever makes sense in regards to your background and your candy heart color. And then we'll go fill in the shadow with the color that makes sense. So we already talked about that so much. Just ask me if you need help with those colors. And I'm making my brush strokes follow that curve of those contours. And maybe you could even go back through and do that vertical line down the side to really drive home the perspective there. All right, I'm gonna use my bigger brush or maybe just my flat brush for my shadow and this lighter purple. And I want to, oh yeah, that's nice. That feels like a really natural shadow next to that pink. It's got some good pink in it. And I'm just making my brush strokes follow a straight path. It might be a diagonal straight line. We can definitely curve it in some places, but we just want to make it feel flat. Give the sense that the side of the heart is three-dimensional, but this area is flat. And maybe that's just coming across because of context, but it doesn't hurt to make your brush strokes follow those contours as well. One thing that I'm doing that is definitely comes from years of practice is I'm kind of pressing down really hard on my brush to get that clean line to happen. I'm kind of dragging it nice and flush right there. Maybe you've seen people who paint walls for a living do that sort of thing along the edge of a wall seam or near an outlet or the crown molding without tape. It's so satisfying to watch those videos, people painting without painter's tape and getting those clean lines. But what they're doing is they're just making their brush go nice and flat against the surface, putting the full pressure on it so that they can drag it in a straight line. That's what I'm doing, in case you noticed, to quickly fill that in with a clean line. Oh, thank you, Cher. Happy Valentine's Day to you. Yeah, I think this is a fun way to spend Valentine's Day too. Okay. And thank you, Michelle, for seconding that. All right, and then the last thing we need to make this feel three-dimensional is maybe some reflective light here along the edge of the side of the, so I'm just using a little bit of white. And again, looking at the photograph will make this easier than just trying to guess at where that will go. So I'm just looking at this picture, although maybe let me look at the one, yeah, that was on the pink paper. See how it kind of has that little bit of white at the bottom there? Oh, that's still wet. Ideally, it would be dry and not bleeding. I'm just adding a little white to make that bottom feel more three-dimensional. Okay, I'm going to stop there because it was a little, I don't know why that was so wet in that area. All right, let's see if this is dry enough to draw on it with a Posca. If not, I'm going to just draw on one of my blank panels. And I'm just going to dab it with, well, I can dab it with my paper towel or I can touch it with my finger. Let me see. No, it's still wet. Well, maybe. I'm going to try it. I think it might be dry enough. Touching it with my paper towel and only a tiny bit is coming off. Oh no, I just bled some of that purple when I did that. Well, I'll have to do some touch-ups down there to that purple. All right, I'm gonna go for it, y'all. Take a breath. That's what I'm doing. That's my plan. Let me look at my little sketchbook paper again. Okay, so if you've got Posca marker, you gotta shake it up, get it to flow, and get the liquid to come down into the tip there. Sometimes you gotta press it a few times. Do the thing that you shouldn't do to any other pen nib, which is press it down onto the paper to get it to come out. Maybe scribble with it a little bit. Okay, so we're looking for that kind of broken text. We might go over just a couple minutes here, but try not to go over more than a handful of minutes. Okay. So, and I'm just going to do it with my handwriting. I mean, if you want to look at some fonts, you definitely can, but these turned out just fine. And all I did was just capital letters in my own handwriting. I'm just leaving some gaps. Like I kind of started the T, but then I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. And you could do this with your paintbrush. It's just going to take a little more brush stroke control. I felt like it was easier to do the kind of broken line thing with the Posca. I just thought of passive aggressive candy hearts instead of take a breath. It could be calm down. That's how to sleep on the couch. Give your partner a candy heart that says calm down. Although it's funny, my boyfriend says relaxed to me all the time instead of calm down. And sometimes, for some reason, that does not bother me. But if he said calm down, I'd be like, what? Never in the history of calming down has a person calmed down by being told to calm down. But take a breath is nice. Let's take a breath. That's relaxing and affirming. Okay, so yeah, we really just don't want them to look too perfect. I think when I was painting them, it felt a little trickier to make them not look perfect. And I kept like going back over them with white paint to try to put these gaps in there. And then I remembered my Posca markers and was like, oh, that's nice. And it makes it a little easier since not everybody is going to have the brush stroke control. And these are acrylic paint markers. So I know like one substitute could be a Sharpie, but it's not going to have the same effect as a paint marker. All right, here's where I can't go too fat with my B. Gotta make sure I can squeeze it all in there. It might be easier to just go ahead and write it once and then make the, but then the slower I go, the easier it is to put those gaps in. Take a break might be a good one too. That's one less letter. I'm getting into some wet paint over here. It's making it harder. Or it might be that I need to shake up my Posca a little more. I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, my paint is still wet. Okay, I'm gonna have to finish this later, but y'all get the idea. I'm glad I was able to at least do some of it. I'm gonna have to finish this when my paint is more dry. Okay, we did it. It was a lot in an hour and a half, but I'm excited. I'd love to see some of y'all's examples. Do you want to hold them up and share? Oh, we got Barbara did Happy Thoughts. Look at that. That's so fun. Lovely. My Sullivan buddy. Oh, Dorothy, that's so cute. I love it. Yeah, another thing I didn't suggest, but yeah, putting someone's name on there. Oh, Dream So Big. That's lovely. That one turned out really nicely. Thank you, Susanna. Oh, is that it? Nobody else is ready to share? That's okay. All right. So thank you all for joining me. This was really fun. And if you finish them later, then feel free to post them on Instagram with those hashtags or even Facebook and tag me so I see them. You could message them to me if you don't want to post them. That's fine as well. And then next week, join me again and we'll be finishing that 2 ways to start an acrylic painting. All right, thank you all so much. Thank you, Chanel. Y'all have a good rest of your night.